Hey guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Tuomo Vahkonen, coming to you live today here from my sanctuary here in Tahiti. And today, my special guest is Brandon Orr, coming to us from Texas. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm outstanding, man. Absolutely thrilled to be here. Honor and a privilege, and just looking forward to seeing where this discussion takes us. So thanks for giving me this opportunity, man.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. All right. So today's discussion is actually super, super interesting for myself as well. We're going to be talking about resilience. We're probably going to dive into human behavior, about habits. Brendan has a PhD, been doing lots of work with military, still doing lots of work over in the military, and also with the top athletes and executives. So this is going to be jam-packed discussion about lots of golden nuggets. So do guys do us a favor, so leave us a little comment on the chat box. Where are you tuning in from, and how can we help you with building your high performance, and especially when it comes to resiliency? So that's what we're going to be talking about today with Brandon. So without further ado, give us a little bit of a sort of 1 to 2 minute introduction. Who is Brandon, and how did you come about from where you started from to where are you right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I started out in coaching college football, and it wasn't in my mind conceptualized as resilience, but that's when I first became fascinated with the psychological universe that accompanies performers, because I had an athlete who he was one of our top recruits. He was wildly talented physically, but was more interested, honestly, in smoking weed and drinking Grey Goose than he was
Mhm.
being excellent in football. And I take an extreme sense of responsibility in my job, and whether it's trying to help a guy win a national championship or just make a roster spot on the team. Obviously, with this situation, to quote unquote fix him, to address this lack of motivation, if you will. And that was, I spent my summer before that training camp just buried in Barnes and Noble, reading
Mhm.
anything and everything that I could on sports psych handbooks to find an angle. And I loved that it was a better utilization of my full skill set, from a coach and an academic side. And that was where my love and my fascination with resilience came in.
Mhm.
And from there went into the PhD at the University of Missouri. It's in educational and counseling psychology with an emphasis in sports psych, and immediately started working with teams and kind of onesies, twosies with athletes, trying to
Mhm.
help them with that headspace. And that led to, in that situation with that athlete, how unarmed I felt to
Mhm.
deal with that situation, and to know how to have that athlete-centered approach to get him, quote unquote, back in the game. And
Mhm.
so that was the impetus for starting the positive coaching program, was arming coaches with this understanding of relationship, and that we have a physical development. Obviously, that's central to sport, but there's also a human development and a
Mhm.
psychological development that's mobilizing and capitalizing off of their inborn capacity to turn it into and develop it into ability. And we were doing a couple of things that caught the eye, if you will, of the
Mhm.
military, and then they recruited me away. Air Force Special Warfare recruited me away to stand up a performance psych program to help them deal with the rigors of an incredibly challenging and demanding task in and of
Mhm.
itself, but also the environment which within it's occurring. And so that's what I've been trying to crack that nut for the last 2.5 years.
Beautiful. That's fantastic. That's a fascinating story. There's so many couple things that I do definitely want to touch up on. The very first thing is, for the purpose of this conversation, let's define resiliency. Obviously, there is something that you can look from the books, but what is your definition of resiliency when it
Yeah,
comes?
it's absolutely the way we've operationalized it for Air Force Special Warfare, which is also what we did with some of the pilot programs, athletic teams that we were working with. And this is what we went with. It's a positive adaptation to the disruption of, okay, the resistance to, and the challenge within the pursuit of an end of high value. And I say the end because it's not just the process, right? It's so important in my mind to understand there's a psychological resilience, okay, but there's also a behavioral resilience. And so the psychological resilience is obviously, okay, how do we deal with setback? Okay, how do we deal with the fact that we didn't hit the end of high value, but we made progress? Okay, but that's going to require obviously a psychological resilience, okay, to continue to persist amidst that disruption or agitation or resistance. But at the end of the day, and you and I have talked about this in numerous other spaces, the point is to succeed. And that is true in sport. That is true in military. It's true in business. It's true in many, many other domains. But as the stakes and the risk of failure get higher, I don't think we do justice to the people that we're serving if we don't understand how critical it is, not just to try, but to actually service that end that is of high value. So that's why we kind of crafted it in that way, that it's the pursuit of an end. It's not just the pursuit of something meaningful. It's the pursuit to the end where it is achieved and accomplished.
Fascinating. I don't know how to break that down from my perspective, but let me then. How do you play with the idea of the journey, of the pursuit of the journey in a way? Because a lot of the times, and this comes into the sports, and this is what I'm also very passionate about. And I would love to get your opinion and idea. That's the resilience part, but how does that ties into the idea that if we only quote unquote are tied up to the end goal, we a lot of the times forget the journey. We forget the present moment. We forget to be right here, right now. And I believe, especially when it comes to sports, those high operations, especially in military, you have to be hyper present and not looking at the end value, if you will. How do you balance that? How do you work with that?
Yeah, so I think it's the framework. Okay. And that's what I don't care what principle you want to base it off of. If you want to go with mental toughness, or you want to go with mindfulness, you want to go with resilience. Let's leave the construct aside. What's in my mind absolutely critical, first of all, is that you can operationalize it with a definition. That's critical. But I think then, can you come around that concept with a framework that speaks to exactly what you're talking about? Okay, like resilience, it's about the end. And we know sport and business and military operations absolutely are going to be gauged by the end. But we know through experience, and we certainly know through anecdote and pointedly through the research, that a process orientation is directly correlated with increased persistence, okay, increased grit. And we talk in these spaces all the time that, yes, the outcome is of value and the outcome is paramount. But there's a process orientation that dictates that outcome. That is the far kind of, there's more meat there to be invested in that process. And so the framework is process versus outcome, challenge versus threat, approach versus avoidance, relationship with failure, perfectionism, segmenting in this. So there's this whole framework that we've built around that definition of resilience that accounts for all of those nuances that you've talked about, so that this thing called resilience isn't nebulous and it's not insight targeted. And it accounts for most of the things that are going to accompany them on that psychological universe within that pursuit.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like, and then obviously now this is a framework. This is a mental concept right now, and then how can we bring that into the, let's say, war field or the play field, or even in your relationships, or like into your everyday life? I think that's where the interesting part comes in, and how can we like have these conceptual ideas and bring them into a everyday action steps, everyday life, if you will. Because I think when we are in those high stake environments, or either in the quote unquote the battlefield or even in the training field, it's possibly easier. I'm not sure if it's help me understand it. Is it easier over there to have these ideas and really bring them into the forefront and give some action into those ideas? Whereas when you're in the quote unquote kind of in the normal life, then you kind of often forget a lot of the things, or it's harder to implement than when you're in those high stake environments.
The word that comes to mind for me is reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And how often in a performance domain, it's natural to us to reflect. In the simplest terms, what went well, why? Mm-hmm. What didn't go well, why? Mm-hmm. I can look at how I wrestled that match, and I can assess from a performance standpoint on the areas of performance relative to wrestling. What went well, why? What didn't go well, why? And we can do that within sales in terms of, did I close the deal? And we clearly do that within the military with after action reports after every, training exercise or every mission. There's going to be an after action report where hard truths are spoken about just that very thing. Mm-hmm. As a group, what went well, why? What didn't go well, why? I don't know, at least for me, that I am always cognizant of having that reflection relative to being a husband, relative to being an uncle, relative to self-care, relative to being a son. Like how much do I reflect on the process of being a good son, being a good husband? That's the piece that comes to mind for me. Is I think it's endemic to performance. But how often do we really view being a father, being a husband, self-care in terms of a performance?
Love it, love it, love it. Before we pressed play, we talked a little bit about your journaling. And obviously when it comes to reflection, that's what I do as well. Mm-hmm. What are the other ideas or tools that you use for self-reflection?
Yeah, I've gotten really big for me into, I think in the business world, they call it a vision map. Mm-hmm. Okay. I've gotten a lot of traction personally from a values map. I've got 5 core values that I look for the intersection between my life and those values every day. Mm. And I think in some regards it sounds super cheesy, but it goes all the way down to how I park my car. I have gotten to a point now through habituation where if the car is not straight, I will repark it because my number one core value is excellence. And it affects how I mow the lawn. It affects how I park. It affects how I floss my teeth. It affects whether or not I'm super tired and go to bed without brushing my teeth. Like it's that intense level of value committed action. And so what I started doing was just creating a map of those 5 values. And it's kind of like a Venn diagram where I start with a value and then I map out, right? And I will go for a whole week. And I'll do this ideally once a month, but sometimes it's so time intensive that it's maybe once every 2-3 months. I will just take an entire day, all activity, like all the way down to how much time I spend on Instagram or how much time I spend on a video game on my phone. Every second accounted for. And I just list it out in time intervals. And then what I'll do is I start drawing lines between how that activity correlates with my values. And for me, you start to see how much stuff is filled into the day that does not in any way either correlate with your values or is antithetical to your values. And I can't tell you how much traction I've gotten from that. And really, truly, the level of reflection that it's brought about on some of those non-professional domains, the husband, the brother, the uncle, that type of piece.
I love that because a lot of people, well, I wouldn't say easy, but it's easier to do that for our professional lives
Mm-hmm.
or our athletic life or sports or business, what have you. But to do that for your personal life, that's a
Yeah.
powerful exercise. Like, how did I show up today or this week as a father or as
Yeah.
a son, as you mentioned? All of a
Yeah.
sudden, that reflection goes few levels deeper than the professional one, and
Yeah.
that's where the power comes into me. Because if you're able to do that for your personal life and really truly be honest and truthful with yourself, like, was I a good father today? Was I a good partner today or this week? And all of a sudden, like, no, I wasn't really.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you come up from there and you say, like, I need to shape up, I need to show up differently, all of a sudden that action and that behavior, more than likely, and I would say almost in every single case, then reflects back onto into your professional life, into your sports and so forth.
Yeah.
I love
100%.
that. I
Yeah.
love that exercise values map. And you said that you have about 5 core values that you check every
Mm-hmm.
day, every morning. Is that kind of like?
When I'm doing this exercise, yeah, um, you know what, it's trying to bring them to the forefront of my attention,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can get ahead of that activity before I get engrossed in it and before I engage in it. Right. So
Yeah.
before the mindless Instagram flipping through reels happens while waiting for an appointment,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in the process of mapping my values immediately into the forefront before that impulse gets entertained, is this restraint of, okay, you value excellence, right? And you value maximizing.
Mm-hmm.
How in any way is flipping through Instagram in accordance with those two values? And I catch it before I kind of get down that rabbit hole, if you will.
Love it.
And it's not something I do every day, but when I'm
Mm-hmm.
in that map, it's absolutely something I do every single day for that prescribed period of time.
So talk to me about a little bit about human behavior in relation to this. When you, like, how do you catch yourself, like, oh, this is pointless, this is not
Yeah.
making any sense, like you just mentioned Instagram reels, for example, or what have you?
Yep.
Do you have triggers, or what triggers you to say, like, okay, this is pointless, I'm like, I need to get back on track, if you will? And or do you have rituals, routines, and habits that then kind of recenter you and it's like, okay, let's get back on track?
Because the pace of life that I keep is so fast,
Mm-hmm.
the one that I keep is the journaling quiet time in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's not even a ritual, it's a duty.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Why? Because for me, there's a tendency to get massively over invested in my work,
Mm-hmm.
not for serving other people, but for serving my own self-worth, for
Mm-hmm.
serving my sense of, I guess, importance, as narcissistic as that sounds out loud.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a dangerous kind of toxic seed for me to fertilize.
Mm-hmm.
That journaling piece just does a tremendous job for me of making sure that I understand that the people that I serve and the work that I do is to make them increase, to not make me increase.
Mm.
And that is something that's just so salient in me when I'm doing that. And I'm aware of that. And because this values committed element is so salient to me,
Mm-hmm.
that to not do that is immediately met in my mind with the counterweight of, yeah, but you say you value this and you say you value excellence, but you're not going to do a thing that you know is absolutely nurturing for
Mm-hmm.
yourself, for your spiritual domain, and for the people you serve. That's a big piece.
Yeah.
Relative to
Yeah.
that thing you're talking about, like how do we get ourselves to this place where we can even be aware? So it's not just like automatic impulse, entertain it,
Mm-hmm.
impulse, indulge it. You and I've talked about this. I think it's got a lot of traction on Clubhouse right now. It's the cold shower or the cold water immersion. And I love the contrast. Obviously, Texas is hot all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the contrast of a hard workout and immediately jumping into that cold contrast. And I don't allow myself to react. I don't allow myself to have any visceral reaction. I don't allow myself to get tense.
Mm-hmm.
I get in, it's cold, and my attention directly goes to a resonant frequency pattern of in for 3 and out for 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot implore enough how that then keeps me from getting a Dr. Pepper on the way home, from losing my temper and getting a little quick-tongued with a colleague, or an operator, or an athlete, or feeling like when I'm driving that I'm somehow an agent of justice, and that when I get cut off, I have to, seek revenge. I know it sounds simplistic, but man, that cold shower and forcing myself into that attention management and that task-directed focus has been powerful for me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I come from Finland originally, and I've spoken about this. The people that have followed me a little while, they know that, in Finland, we grew up with that. Like, it's part of our culture. We've done cold immersions, hundreds of years, and it's just kind of part of our DNA in a way. So I love that. I love that. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to jump into something else. Actually, something that came to my mind, what you mentioned about the value of excellence. And I think that's really important to make a distinction between excellence and perfection, because a lot of people think of perfection as something that, like, I'm a perfectionist. But when you switch that, at least for me, it helps a lot. Instead of looking for perfection, you're looking for excellence. That helps me, that helps me to show up differently. I don't have to have let's put it this way. Let me ask you that. Like, how would you differentiate between perfectionism and striving for excellence? Because for me, there's a little bit of a difference, and it helps me to kind of show up differently.
I would quadrant it. In my mind, that's exactly where it went to. That process, outcome. And underneath process is excellence. And underneath outcome is perfectionism, or the perfect outcome. I think that's the way that it gets tempered. If there's time, I love perfectionism, and I love the notion and the pursuit of that perfect rep, or that perfect outcome, or that perfect meeting, or whatever you want to apply perfectionism to domain wise. I don't feel like it has to be the villain that it's made out to be. I feel like we've gotten a little too one-sided on perfectionism, and I absolutely understand why. But like I said, I think it's just one-sided a little bit. So if we have time, we can definitely get into that. How we parse them out. That's when you look at any end, right? Any goal that we're pursuing. And if we put it in terms of, militaristically, one of the core elements that we use is a 25 meter underwater, right? And it's a peak inhalation, go subsurface, and go 25 to 50 meters on a single breath. You're not allowed to surface. That requires a process, 100%. It requires your breathe up, right? Where you're in and out and getting physiologically, you're getting yourself in that homeostatic place where your physiology is supporting this activity. It requires a perfect wall push. There's a stroke sequence that we use that has to be perfect. When you start talking about going 50 meters on a single breath, it's got to be perfect, right? And then obviously it's the matter of touching the wall and ascending in a safe manner, but also not in a panicked and rushed manner that affects the swim back for the next interval of 25 meters. That is a process that can 100% be evaluated through the lens of excellence. Did I commit to my breathe up? Okay, did I commit to the purging of my breath? Am I committing between the reps of underwaters to pushing out my exhale to activate that vagal response and get that heart rate down? All those pieces can be evaluated within excellence. And that pushes us towards process. And I guess the rub would be, do you have the belief? Okay, do you have the goal, achievement, expectation that if you master that process, the outcome will come? That's the rub.
Love it. I love that. That's a beautiful wrap right there for that one, for that sequence. Let's jump into something that I'm really interested to hear your ideas, especially when it comes to the piece of resiliency. The work that you do, especially with top athletes and in the military, the emotions there are something to be, I wouldn't say left alone, or left aside, but there's a certain way or process how you deal with emotions, correct?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to military. And I think the common person thinks that especially the special operations person is, lack of a better word, like a robot-like, correct?
Yeah,
like
sure, right.
they just operate, and the task oriented and so forth. And when that person goes back home eventually, and they go back to their families, and all of a sudden you need to bring those emotions out onto the field again, and you have to actually feel something. How do you balance that out, or what have you seen as struggles, and how people have overcome that, going from that task oriented operation, especially from, let's say, on the warfield or in the very, very top athletes, and when they then go back home, and with their partners and marriages and so forth and so forth.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating conversation, Tuomo, because the resilience on the battlefield, and even the resilience in the training pipeline to put on the beret to be an operator, well, I'm not so sure that it's not antithetical or counter some to what's necessary at home. The most important word that comes to mind for me is inoculation. Like, that's what these guys are trained to do. They are trained to inoculate themselves to the maladaptive influence of stress on their behavior, right?
Exactly.
Like a force shield almost. Okay. It's logical then that when they get home, they're in that same space. That I don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the resources or the time to deal with this stress, because the reality is it's going to affect me as an operator. And so now you've kind of, you've got this yin yang, right? And I think about it like this from a wrestling standpoint. There's a mindset, and there's a tenacity and a violence of action that makes you an elite wrestler, right? How do you turn that off then when you're in a bar, or you're at a house party, or anywhere, if you will, that triggers that type of energy, right? And so what I've often said, because they struggle with that, and it's the thing that makes you so great on the mat, makes you a liability off of it. I'm not so certain that there's not some truth to that relative to the operator. The thing that makes them exceptional on the battlefield is, I guess it's a beautiful contradiction. It's the very thing that then makes you a liability as a partner and a father and a family member and a friend. It's Dr. Leah Walsh. Okay, she's an op psych within the Navy. She is brilliant. She's young, 5 years into her career, and she's brilliant. She did a study on this together as a doc student with me on post-traumatic growth, right? So not the PTSD element, but on the other side of that, where you've returned to those baseline behaviors in your life before the trauma, right? It's a fascinating study. It's beautiful work, because there was two things that came out of that: the emotional foreclosure, right? The inoculation of anything outside of operating. Just going to put walls up, and it's almost like Bad Boys 2, if you've seen that movie, right? There's this box, and we're going to put these things that we're talking about in this box, and we're not going to talk about them again. I think that's a piece of it. And the other is opposing worldviews. It's not immune to an operator looking at his wife or his friends or any family member, even his kids and members of his community, and not being so clear to him that we don't share the same worldview. And I think that has a really big piece on just not engaging on resilience as a husband and resilience as a father and a community member and a friend and a brother and so forth, as opposed to what you would think would be so streamlined. This is resilience in the battlefield as an operator. This is resilience as a husband. But there is a gap there.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a good question to discuss is, might it need to be there? Because the stakes of what they're doing are so great.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good one. If the gap actually needs to be there, because if we let me just give a couple of comments here. Like Natasha Jones is saying, masculine versus feminine energy, which is obviously very true. And then she also adds that this happens also to women in the corporate by day. Different skills needed as a mother and a homemaker.
Yeah, 1000%.
I almost feel, I'm not sure if would it be any easier per se, but if women would have a different perspective into this, and if they're able to bring a different part of themselves easier when it comes to home. I'm just putting that very lightly there. I'm just thinking as I go. And for us, as from masculine perspective, we're so kind of quote unquote task oriented that the gap that you mentioned there is possibly even larger than for our female counterparts. I might be completely off with that. I'm just having that as an idea there. And then let me just continue with this. What you just mentioned there is that, like, maybe that gap, especially in those kind of special operations and very, very top athletic performance environments, maybe that gap needs to be there. Whereas now there's in this day and age, there's a lot of talk about the work-life balance, and I'm kind of not a big fan of that, because I always think that maybe we have to have the alignment of our professional and personal life. But what you just mentioned there, that maybe it's actually healthy to have that gap there. Now, I think, again, another question to kind of continue with that is how big that gap needs to be. How big of a gap? And I guess that depends of the work that you do, of your quote unquote your professional life, especially.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So love that discussion. That's absolutely fantastic. The what about, let's get it more into sort of granular right now. When somebody's listening to this right now and they feel like, hey, my resiliency is off. Like, I don't have the tenacity to show up as a father, as a husband, on my own quote unquote battlefield, because we all have our battles to do. What would be your sort of 1 to 3 tips and tools and strategies of build and train resilience?
Let's kind of talk about it paradigmatically first, and then I think we might be able to build out some actual applied skills from there. The first thing that comes to mind, we've already covered. I truly believe we have to be self-aware and have an inventory of what our values are. In every domain. Who are we trying to be? What are the core constitutions that should guide and drive my behavior? And I tend to gravitate towards the behaviorism piece. Because intention is too comfortable,
Mm.
right? Intention is too safe. And so I can absolutely say that it's my intention to speak with humility. But the first moment that maybe in that meeting I feel challenged and I get that ego arousal coming in, that intention didn't really matter if I allowed the ego to influence my behavior. And that leads me to this piece of, once you have those values architected out and they're salient to you and they're at the forefront of your consciousness in terms of being tethered to your identity,
Mm-hmm.
well, then it becomes a matter of, all right, how do I get to the behavioral part where I habituate myself and my behaviors to those values?
Mm-hmm.
And the piece that has been so clear to me from sport, from performance, and from the military is about 1,000 times a day, I think we enter into this kind of dilemmatic fight between a values committed action
Mm-hmm.
and an emotion committed action. Because why are the gyms the way that they are after a New Year's resolution? Why? Because they have that actual value. I wouldn't in any way question that they value fitness, that they value living a more healthy lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would argue is that they're making it within facilitative emotions. I feel like working out today. I feel like going to the gym today. I feel like being respectful today. I feel like eating healthy today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, emotions are a resource that absolutely are renewable. And if they're renewable, then that means they're extinguishable. And so within that dilemma, I think it's completely natural for us to understand that there are going to be a number of times, again, dilemmatically, where we do not feel like doing something, but that because it is a value, right? And it is a matter of excellence. And we understand that these behaviors come in to regimen through habituation, that then it's absolutely necessary that we have to have some type of filter for emotion driven versus values driven. And so I think paradigmatically, those two pieces have to be a core tenet as we talk about this at an everyday level.
Love it, love it, love it. Like there's a huge takeaway for someone who's battling there and looking at like, oh, I don't quote unquote feel like it today. What is your value? What is your core value there? And then you're like, okay, how do I feel about it now? As in like, okay, I value this enough in order to take my action right now, being going to the gym or healthy food or quote unquote unhealthy food, what have you. So that's beautiful. That's a strong point right there. I love that. So let's start wrapping up here a little bit. Thank you so much for your time already by this stage.
Absolutely.
How can people find you? And actually, something that I wanted to put it right in the beginning, but like, let's put this piece in the end, is that when I started researching you and following you, I think you're the person. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're more in the field. You're actually more in the action. Like you like to be on the field and less on these distractive devices, and so that's already a testament to your CV, if you will. You're more in the field and less on these devices. But saying that, if people want to look for you, if people want to, and when people want to come and say hi to you online, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, obviously. Just it's Brandon Orr, ORR/Ph.D. That's easy to pull up on my LinkedIn. And then as I started, really, truly, man, just getting the courage up to even venture into this stuff and knowing that I've got some different ideas. I keep hearing the same things over and over that I don't agree with. Man, let's see if we can't broaden the horizon a little bit. And that's what pushed me to Instagram, and it's just Dr. Brandon Orr. is my Instagram handle, and those are really the only two areas that I'm active, as well as Clubhouse for the cool kids club that's involved in Clubhouse. So those three are kind of where I divide my attention upon, and honestly, like we talked about this morning, I don't post. I'm not active, in part because it's verdant to me. I don't quite understand what it's even supposed to look like. And the only post that I've even put out is one that I took from you and put to my own. So, but man, I am active on the direct messages, and obviously following a fair amount of people on the LinkedIn. So those are the two spots for sure.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. And just to put the last piece out there, we're also doing a Clubhouse room today, later on today, and under a lifestyle, high performance mastery club over there. We're going to talk about resilience today with other people as well. So if you're on Clubhouse, if you're checking us out over there, come and join our club there and join our conversation there live today, later on today at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern. That's where we're going to be hanging out again, talking about resiliency with Brandon and whole other folks. Thank you so much, Brandon, for this time. That was super insightful. I'm going to go and look for this again and take some snippets and insights, because there was a lot that you said. You unpacked beautifully resilience and high performance and a whole bunch of other things about habitual behaviors. So thank you so much. I look forward to chatting with you again. And if you guys, if you're checking this out on replay, give a shout out to Brandon. Go and follow him. Send him a message if something sparked your interest about this conversation. Reach out to him. He's a wealth of knowledge and wealth of expertise, and definitely wealth of excellence. So thank you so much, Brandon, for your time. And I look forward to seeing you soon again.
And you as well. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks for everybody who joined in on it. And it's just great to have people who are passionate come together and share in that. That's the beauty of these platforms. So thank you to you, Tuomo, for the opportunity, man. It's been absolutely a blessing.
Thank you so much, Brandon. See you guys later.